A U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster III just landed at Subic Bay in the Philippines, and if you understand what this aircraft is designed to carry, you'd understand why China is watching very carefully. This isn't a routine cargo flight. This is strategic messaging delivered in the form of a 265-ton military transport that can carry tanks, artillery, and rapid deployment forces directly into potential conflict zones. The C-17 landing at Subic Bay matters because of where Subic Bay is located. Close enough to project power. Close enough to reinforce Philippine positions. Close enough to make Beijing extremely uncomfortable about U.S. military logistics in the South China Sea. Here's what most people miss about the C-17. It's not a passenger plane. It's not a commercial cargo hauler. It's a strategic airlifter designed for one specific purpose: rapidly deploying combat power into austere environments. That means delivering heavy equipment directly to short, rough runways in locations without established air infrastructure. The C-17 can carry 77 tons of cargo, that's 3 M1 Abrams tanks, or 6 Bradley fighting vehicles, or 102 fully equipped paratroopers, or a mix of artillery, ammunition, and supplies sufficient to support a battalion-sized operation for days. It can land on a 500-foot runway, half the length commercial jets need. It can operate from semi-prepared airstrips, dirt runways, and emergency landing zones. But here's what makes it strategically significant. The C-17's combat range is 2,400 miles with maximum payload. From Subic Bay, that range covers every contested feature in the South China Sea. Taiwan, southern Japan, and significant portions of mainland China. It's not just about where it landed, it's about where it can reach from there. When a C-17 lands at Subic Bay, it's demonstrating logistics capability. The U.S. can fly heavy equipment from American bases in Guam, Japan, or even Alaska directly to Philippine territory in 4 Mi-8. No need for naval transport that takes days or weeks. No need for permission to transit through other countries' airspace. Direct, rapid, heavy logistics into a location that matters geographically. Subic Bay isn't just any Philippine location. It's one of the most strategically important deepwater ports in Southeast Asia. From 1898 to 1992, it was the largest U.S. naval base outside American territory. The base hosted the 7th Fleet, submarine facilities, aircraft carriers, and enough logistics infrastructure to support major combat operations throughout the Pacific. The U.S. left in 1992 after the Philippine Senate voted not to renew the base's agreement. For 30 years, Subic Bay operated primarily as a commercial port and free trade zone. But geopolitics has a way of returning to strategic locations, and Subic Bay's geography hasn't changed. Here's what makes Subic Bay irreplaceable strategically. It has a natural deep-water harbor capable of handling aircraft carriers and large amphibious assault ships. It has 7,200 feet of runway that can handle any military transport or bomber in the U.S. inventory. It's positioned on the western side of Luzon, the Philippine island closest to the South China Sea's contested waters. From Subic Bay to Scarborough Shoal, the reef that China seized from the Philippines in 2012, is 150 miles. A C-17 covers that distance in 20 minutes. Attack helicopters launched from Subic Bay reach Scarborough in 30 minutes. Naval vessels leaving Subic Bay reach contested waters in 6–8 hours. The geography creates tactical options that don't exist from other locations. But here's what China understands about Subic Bay's reactivation. If the U.S. returns to operating regularly from Subic Bay, the balance of power in the South China Sea shifts immediately. China has spent 20 years building artificial islands and militarizing contested features. They control the physical territory. But if U.S. logistics can flow freely through Subic Bay, American and Philippine forces can respond to any Chinese action within hours instead of days. For decades, the Philippines maintained a constitutional restriction on permanent foreign military bases. The sentiment after the U.S. departure in 1992 was that the Philippines should maintain sovereignty and independence, not host foreign military installations. This wasn't anti-American, it was post-colonial identity assertion. But China changed the calculation. In 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoal from Philippine control. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled in favor of Philippine claims in the South China Sea. China ignored the ruling and continued militarizing artificial islands within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. By 2023, Chinese Coast Guard vessels were harassing Philippine fishing boats, blocking resupply missions to Philippine military outposts, and asserting de facto control over waters that legally belong to the Philippines. The Philippine government under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. made a strategic choice. In 2023, the Philippines granted the U.S. access to 4 additional military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA. These aren't permanent U.S. bases. The Philippines maintain sovereignty, but they're locations where U.S. forces can pre-position equipment, conduct training, and operate during joint exercises or emergencies. Subic Bay isn't officially one of the EDCA sites, but the 2023 agreement expanded U.S. access throughout the Philippines. The C-17 landing at Subic Bay signals that even non-EDCA locations are available for U.S. military logistics when needed. That flexibility is strategic ambiguity that gives both countries options without committing to permanent installations. Here's what this means practically. The U.S. doesn't need to station forces permanently at Subic Bay. They just need access. A C-17 can fly from Guam to Subic Bay in 4 hours, unload equipment, and return. Attack helicopters can deploy for exercises and return to permanent bases afterward. The infrastructure exists. The legal access exists. The logistics chain exists. That's enough to change the strategic equation. The Pentagon doesn't announce cargo manifests for strategic airlifters, but we can infer what makes sense based on current U.S.-Philippine military cooperation and the security environment. Possibility 1. Patriot missile defense components. The Philippines has been seeking air defense systems to protect against potential Chinese missile strikes on Philippine military installations. A C-17 can carry Patriot launcher units, radar systems, and interceptor missiles. Deploying even a single battery to northern Luzon would provide air defense coverage over Philippine territory closest to Taiwan, significant if tensions escalate. Possibility 2. Rapid deployment force equipment. The U.S. Marines operate on an expeditionary advanced base operations concept, small, mobile forces that can deploy quickly to contested areas. A C-17 can deliver HIMARS rocket artillery, lightweight vehicles, communications equipment, and supplies sufficient to establish a forward operating position within hours. If tensions rise in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea, having pre-positioned equipment at Subic Bay means forces can deploy immediately rather than waiting for naval transport. Possibility 3. Humanitarian assistance and disaster response supplies. The Philippines is frequently hit by typhoons, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. The U.S. military maintains pre-positioned disaster response equipment throughout the Pacific. A C-17 delivery to Subic Bay could be legitimately humanitarian, water purification systems, medical supplies, engineering equipment for debris removal. This is plausible cover for testing logistics routes and procedures. But here's what China assumes regardless of actual cargo. Any U.S. military flight into the Philippines demonstrates capability. Radar installations, anti-aircraft missiles, and anti-ship missiles. They've deployed Coast Guard vessels that outnumber and outmass everyone else's presence. They've asserted control through physical presence and demonstrated willingness to use force. This strategy worked because geography favored China. The South China Sea's contested features are 600 meters 800 miles from major U.S. bases in Japan and Guam. They're 200 meters 300 miles from Chinese military installations on Hainan Island. When tensions rise, China can surge forces faster than the U.S. can respond. Time and distance favor Chinese escalation dominance. But Subic Bay changes the geometry. U.S. forces operating from Philippine territory are 150-200 miles from contested features, closer than Chinese forces in many cases. Response times flip. If China harasses a Philippine vessel at Scarborough Shoal, U.S. aircraft from Subic Bay can be overhead in 20 minutes. Chinese aircraft from Hainan take 40 minutes. Here's the strategic dilemma this creates for China. Their entire South China Sea strategy assumes they can fait accompli, establish facts on the ground faster than others can respond. Seize a reef, build an installation, militarize it, then dare others to evict them. This works when response times are measured in days or weeks. It doesn't work when U.S. logistics can reinforce Philippine positions within hours. The C-17 landing is a signal. The time and distance advantages China has relied on are shrinking. The U.S. can deploy forces to the Philippines as fast as China can surge from Hainan. That doesn't mean war becomes more likely. It means Chinese coercion becomes less effective because the risk calculation changes. The Philippines has historically tried to balance between the U.S. and China. Economically, China is the Philippines' largest trading partner. Geographically, China is a neighbor you can't move away from. But China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, seizing Philippine territory, harassing Philippine vessels, ignoring international law, has pushed Manila decisively toward Washington. President Marcos Jr. has been explicit about this. He said, "If we did not have any challenges, if we did not have a problem in the West Philippine Sea, I don't think I would have worked quite as hard on the relationship with the United States." Translation: China's aggression is driving Philippine-U.S. strategic alignment. But here's what makes this complicated for the region. Osama Fays, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, prefer not to choose sides between the U.S. and China. They want economic ties with China and security guarantees from the U.S. But they don't want to be a proxy battleground. The Philippines aligning closely with the U.S. creates pressure on other ASEAN members to clarify their positions. Vietnam faces similar Chinese pressure in the South China Sea. They've been expanding defense ties with the U.S. while maintaining diplomatic relations with China. Malaysia and Indonesia have contested claims with China but prefer diplomatic solutions. Singapore is militarily capable and strategically positioned but officially non-aligned. Thailand has traditionally been a U.S. treaty ally but has grown closer to China economically. The C-17 landing at Subic Bay forces these countries to confront a choice they'd prefer to avoid. Is the U.S. returning to permanent presence in Southeast Asia? Are they committing to defending contested waters militarily? Or is this temporary posturing that will fade when political winds shift? Countries in the region need to know because their security planning depends on the answer. U.S. military access to the Philippines will likely expand gradually rather than dramatically. No one wants to repeat the optics of permanent bases that trigger nationalist opposition. Instead, expect increasing frequency of exercises, logistics flights, ship visits, and training rotations. The C-17 landing won't be the last. It will become routine. The Philippines will likely request more military assistance from the U.S. air defense systems, patrol vessels, radar installations, training for Philippine forces. The U.S. will provide much of this because it serves American strategic interests to have capable allied forces in the region. This creates a mutual dependency that strengthens the alliance. China will respond, but their options are limited. But that risks pushing the Philippines even closer to the U.S. They can conduct military exercises near Philippine waters to demonstrate power, but the Philippines can invite the U.S. to conduct joint exercises in response. They can apply economic pressure, but that damages their own economic interests and appears like bullying. Here's the strategic bind China faces. Their assertiveness created the conditions that drove the Philippines back toward the U.S. Increasing pressure reinforces that alignment. Decreasing pressure looks like weakness and encourages other countries to resist Chinese claims. There's no good option that restores their advantageous position from 5 years ago. For the U.S., the C-17 landing represents low-cost strategic gain. One cargo flight demonstrates capability, reassures an ally, signals commitment to regional partners, and complicates Chinese planning, all without firing a shot or deploying forces permanently. That's efficient power projection. The C-17 landing at Subic Bay isn't about one aircraft or one delivery. It's about normalizing U.S. military logistics in the Philippines after 30 years of restricted access. It's about shortening response times to contested areas. It's about changing the strategic geometry that has favored Chinese fait accompli in the South China Sea. Geography hasn't changed. Subic Bay is still 150 miles from Scarborough Shoal, but access has changed. Legal permissions have changed. Political will has changed. The combination transforms static geography into dynamic capability. China spent 20 years building artificial islands to project power. The U.S. is rebuilding access to existing infrastructure that China can't match. Subic Bay's facilities were built to support carrier battle groups and sustained combat operations. China's artificial islands, impressive as they are, remain limited by what can be built on reclaimed reef. The comparison isn't even close in terms of strategic utility. The next time China harasses a Philippine vessel or threatens Philippine territory, the calculation is different. U.S. forces aren't days away, they're hours away. Response isn't dependent on aircraft carriers transiting from Japan. It's dependent on C-17, say, flying from Guam. The barrier to American intervention isn't logistics anymore, it's political will. And if China keeps pushing, they're ensuring that political will solidifies with every provocation. That's why one C-17 landing matters, not because of what it carried. Because of what it represents, America's strategic return to a location China thought they'd never have to worry about again.